Good morning, everyone, and you're in for a treat because I am going to share with you um, my version or the version of history in regards to the Kennedy assassination uh, with you because uh, my story, or I should say the history taught to me, was a little bit different than yours. Okay, so the history that you've been taught was that John F. Kennedy was assassinated in Dallas by a crazy man named Oswald, and that he acted alone, blah, 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 and it was a tragedy. Okay? But in the version of history that I was taught, uh, it's a little bit different, and there's a lot more players involved. And in the version of history I was taught, it was Kennedy that was the villain, and the assassins were the heroes. So, yeah. Now, let's start, I guess, with the people that really killed Kennedy and why. I'm going to explain who they were and why they did what they did. Let's start with the Cubans. Let me tell you something about those Cubans in Miami. You do not cross them. Kennedy crossed them. Okay? They recruited an army to go in and try and recapture Cuba from the communists, from Castro. And these troops were they were not ordinary Joes. They came from the elites of the Cuban community. They were there to get their family's land back. That was the motivation. Okay, and when they went in there, they were supposed to just be there for the cameras. The heavy lifting was supposed to be done by the Marines. But Kennedy balked at the last second because of Robert. Robert kept talking him out of it, sending in the troops. And the reason, keep in mind, he'd only been in office 2 or 3 months. The reason is he was worried about his reelection. So he left those Cubans to fend for themselves. They were captured by Castro. Castro immediately executed the leaders, which of course came from the more prominent families. And Kennedy tried to make nice by getting the others back by giving the Cubans some tractors. Well, guess what? The Cubans didn't like that. And when given an opportunity, they took it. But of course, they didn't act alone. Okay? You see, the U.S. military wasn't very happy with the Bay of Pigs either, because they knew Castro was a communist, because it wasn't known at this time. He was pretending not to be a communist at this point. And they really didn't like Kennedy because he seemed to be more concerned about his political career than the safety of the country. So that pissed them off. And then when the Cuban Missile Crisis came, they wanted to invade. Okay? But here's the deal. They knew that Kennedy wasn't going to authorize the invasion of Cuba. So they decided that they were going to invade anyway. Okay, there was going to be a two-pronged thing. They were going to invade Cuba and they were going to arrest Kennedy. Not just Kennedy, but every politician in Congress, in Washington, because they felt that this man should have been impeached. The Democrats refused to impeach him, so they were going to seize control of the government, install a caretaker government, expose all the corruption in Washington, have some big public trials, and then maybe in '68 restore democracy. It's kind of like what Pakistan does every decade or two. Okay, now of course the Russians realized what was going on, so they immediately backed down in Cuba, and that kind of like put an end to that. Okay, but this guy, he knew all of this. Okay, and because he That was his job, to know everything that was going on in Washington. Okay. Now, Mr. Hoover was the very first director of the FBI, and nobody screwed with Hoover because he had these secret files. He knew all the freaking corruption in Washington. He knew what everybody was into, and if you crossed him, he'd leak it. Okay, and he could destroy you. And the reason why is because Hoover was gay. Gay at a time when that was a felony, a crime. You couldn't have a security clearance if you were gay in the 50s and 60s. Oh no, that was it. Okay, and Hoover, not only was he gay, but he had his husband, spouse, whatever, live in the house with him and actually had a job in the FBI on the same floor as him. And they would drive into work together every day. And everybody knew it, but nobody dared do anything about it because they knew about those files. Well, the Kennedys wanted those files because they needed them. Yeah, by the way, yeah, the FBI has been screwing with our elections for frickin' ever since there was an FBI. Oh, are you shocked? Anyway, so they told Hoover that in the second Kennedy administration, they were going to insist that he resigned, and they were going to give Robert control of the FBI. He was going to step down from the Attorney General to become the director of the FBI so they could get a hold of these files. These files, by the way, ended up becoming the black box database files, which were, of course, used in 1988 to screw Gary Hart out of his chances of being president. But that's a different story for a different day. Anyway, Hoover didn't like that. So Hoover encouraged the Cubans to do what they always wanted to do, and he had the military to back him up. Okay? Now, the fly in the ointment was the Russians, because the Russians knew what was going on. So they needed a patsy, someone to keep the Russians at bay. Okay, the deal is that if the Russians got too out of hand, they would go, oh, the Russians were involved. And then, they could cover it that way. All right, now, Mr. Oswald. Mr. Oswald was not an insane gunman. Mr. Oswald was counterintelligence. Okay? They set him up with this Russian wife, and they sent him to Russia to try and infiltrate Russia. But the problem is the wife they gave him was from a prominent white Russian family. Now, what does that mean? You have to know a little something about the Russian Civil War. Okay, there were two sides. There was the Reds, who took over, and the Whites that lost the Civil War. She was the daughter of a prominent white Russian family. So as soon as he showed up with her, they knew that his whole defection story was bullshit. So after cooling his heels in Russia for a year or two, he came back to the United States, and then they set him about, spying on the Russian community over there in Texas. That was his job. Okay, now, everything was going well, but there was a little bit of a mistake. Okay, and the mistake is that Oswald was never supposed to get off the property of the depository. He was supposed to be shot and killed right there. But he got away. He got to drop on the guy. The cop was there to kill him. Okay. Oops. Sorry. Did I ruin someone else's reputation? Anyway, so now Oswald knew that something. He didn't know exactly what was going on, but he knew he didn't do it. And he wanted to talk. So we had a problem. Okay. So this is going to be a shocker for you guys, but the mafia, the American mafia, has at that time had a long history of working with military intelligence. And the guy that ran that connection was this guy, Mr. Philip James Corso. You might know him from his book about the day after Roswell, but this guy was counterintelligence, okay? And he arranged the hit on Oswald. He was also a back channel to the Russians. He also participated in collecting the documentation or files that were used by the commission, the Warren Commission, to investigate the Kennedy assassination. Here's a hint. You can control the conclusions of the report if you can control what evidence they get to see. Okay, so that's Corso. So there you go. Kennedy was assassinated because he was a threat to national security. Okay, and Congress wouldn't act. He pissed off a lot of powerful people, and that's what happened. You know, they got Robert a few years later too, because they weren't going to let him become president either. Okay, they actually feared Robert more than uh, John Kennedy. Now, how do I know all of this? Well, guess what my mom did? What her first job was with the federal government. She worked for the Office of Strategic Services, which eventually became the CIA. One, during the war, they were using the Italians, because she was Italian, okay, to get information on what was going on in Sicily and on the mainland of Italy, and then later on to suppress the communists in late 40s Italy. Okay, and the mafia was key to that. Okay, so when, and by the way, the mafia is very patriotic. So when they had an opportunity to help out, they jumped on it. They didn't even ask any questions. Okay. So anyway, and of course, you know, that's how they got to know each other. And then he has some connections with my father, too. My father worked at Night Vision Labs in Fort Belvoir. And if you read that book on the UFO Roswell thing, you'll understand what the connection is. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the story. Have a nice day.